You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. My guest today is Lloyd Kahn, writer, blogger, and editor-in-chief of Shelter Publications, which is now in its 43rd year of producing books on owner building. Lloyd Kahn was the Shelter editor of the early Whole Earth catalogs and author of the classic book, Shelter, first published in 1973. Lloyd joins me on the phone from his half-acre homestead in Northern California. Welcome to Sustainable World Radio, and it's an honor to have you here. I love your books. They're the only books that I've had on my table in the living room for probably 5 years. They just sit there, and everyone that comes over picks them up, looks through them, and falls in love with them.
Have you seen the latest one?
I do have the latest one. It's great, and we're going to talk about that book too. I've never read or seen books like them, and I've spent hours oohing and eyeing over them, and so have my friends. So definitely wonderful books. So Lloyd, you've been writing about shelter and hand-built housing for over 4 decades. What is it about this topic that keeps you inspired and continuing to put out these amazing books?
I guess I loved building. I helped my dad build a house when I was 12, and so I liked the process. And then when I got out of the Air Force and came back to San Francisco, my wife and I had bought a piece of land that had belonged to her family, so I just started building. And so I knew some basic things, but I didn't really know carpentry, so I learned as I built, and I liked the process, and I felt like I can explain things to other people as a layman rather than, like, if you go to an experienced carpenter and try to learn from him, it's going to be difficult because he knows how to do stuff so well that he doesn't think of how to, that somebody else wouldn't understand it. So if you go to somebody that's just learned something, so that was me. I could talk to people about building and also say that, look, you can do this yourself and you can get out of bank mortgages. But it all started out with building my own houses, and I kind of got into this when I built a place down in Big Sur, and that's when everything started to happen in the counterculture.
And so this was in the 60s?
Yeah. I was an insurance broker in San Francisco from 1960 to 1965. I ran a newspaper in the Air Force for 2 years, from 58 to 60, and then I came back to San Francisco and went into the insurance business with my dad and my brother and my uncle. But all along I was working. I was remodeling the house we were living in on the weekends and after work and my vacation. And I got a job working in Big Sur, building a house out of large bridge timbers on a real spectacular spot looking down on the ocean. After that job in Big Sur, I built my own house in Big Sur. And while I was living there, I discovered geodesic domes. And so through geodesic domes, I got into publishing.
I think you wrote a few books about domes, and I loved reading about refried domes. How did you, that name cracks me up. Yeah, what happened? What made you change your mind about being such an advocate for domes?
Well, it just didn't work. We really thought that they, with a lot of other things in the 60s, that this was the new world and that this was better than the way that homes were being built, and it turned out to be that wasn't the case. And they actually use more resources. You do get more space in a sphere than in any other shape, but a lot of the space in the dome isn't usable. What I tried to do actually is I tried to make domes livable rather than be just sort of like, engineering and scientific marvels, sterile. But I just conclude, we are perpendicular to the earth, and refrigerators and stoves and beds and things like that are rectangular, and so you try to fit them into a dome. And anyway, there were a whole lot of things, and so I quit. I took Dome Book 2 out of print, even though it had sold 160,000 copies, and went around. I thought I have a pretty big audience here, so I better, tell them that there are all these other ways to build. And that's when we did Shelter in 1973. Getting back to your question, is like by the time I started doing books, I really liked doing books, just like I liked building. So so then we did Shelter, and that became a hugely popular book.
Shelter was a revolutionary book, in my opinion.
Yeah, Shelter was a large book. It was 11 by 14, the size of the Whole Earth catalog, and inspired by the Whole Earth catalog, production techniques, which was the newspaper production of the 60s. So we published that in 1973, and we printed 50,000 copies on the first press run, which you'd never do nowadays unless you're a world famous author. We didn't know any better, and it just sold like mad. And so the book has sold 250,000 copies by now. But what it was like after kind of confining myself to building domes and the very strict rules of geometry and mathematics, once I abandoned that, I looked around and I saw all these ways that people were building. When we did Dome Book 2, we went out to a place in the hills behind Santa Barbara. It was an old resort, and we rented the resort for a month, and we put together Dome Book 2 out there. But as we were driving out to the place, I was looking at these buildings by the side of the road, these old farm buildings, and I was thinking, that's really simple. You put up 2x4s and vertical to the earth, and 2x6 for studs, and it's just so simple compared to all the complexities of dome building. So anyway, the Shelter book was just everything, I think what we did there is I decided I was going to do this book, and I was going to show people all these other ways to build. And I'd been sort of I'd been going around shooting pictures. I'd been to Europe, and I'd learned about the English barns, the mortise and tenon barns, and the old way of doing things. So I was shooting photos, and then I traveled across this country and Canada shooting photos, and then went to the Southwest, and then at a certain point we did a poster. We printed it in San Francisco at Ripcroft Press, and it was a wall poster with a collage of all these photos, and we said, we're getting this book together, please contact us if you... Stuff came in, and I kept accumulating it up to a certain point where we just started putting the book together. So there was Shelter in 1973, and then there was Homework in 2004. And I guess for Homework, I probably collected stuff for that for years until we went into production. And then after Homework, 4 years later, was Builders of the Pacific Coast. And that book, actually, that's the best book I've ever done, and it probably sells less copies than any of the others. But Builders of the Pacific Coast was sort of like an odyssey. I discovered these builders up in mostly British Columbia, and so I started going up there in my four-wheel drive truck and spending 3 weeks photographing them. And so anyway, that was 4 years to get that book done. The Builders of the Pacific Coast focused on carpentry, really, building with using driftwood and splitting shakes from the trees on the beach, but master carpenters and also just wonderful homes that have a good feeling. There's some homes you walk into and it just feels good when things are just right in there, and that's something that you don't get in Dwell magazine.
I don't want to touch anything in that house.
Yeah, well, there's hardly anything to touch.
So true. Well, can you share with us, Lloyd? I know that there's probably thousands, literally thousands of memorable homes that you've visited and seen. Can you share with our listeners maybe one or two of just describing something that sticks in your mind of one of the most amazing places that you've visited and chronicled in your books?
Oh, well, my favorite house is a house that was built by a builder who, his name is Lloyd House.
Perfect.
In other words, if I have to name one builder from all these years of interviewing builders and looking at their work, he's the one. And so he built a house on an island in British Columbia that was just, I don't know, it was just perfect. It was the kind of house that, once in a while I'll see a building and I'll just almost have to sit down. It's just like, oh, wow, everything is right here. And that happened to me twice with the other one was a sauna that he built that was sort of like a nautilus shell. But anyway, this little house was on the edge of a marsh. I don't know, you just have to see pictures of it, but it was just beautiful from the outside, and it was beautiful inside. There were all these touches there was craftsmanship, and there were driftwood posts and beams, but it wasn't. They were tasteful, and they fit into it was like a white plaster and wood, and it's hard to describe these things. You sort of have to see them, but that was one building. In these, say, 5 books, there's probably over 6,000 photographs. And here and there are things that are just to have everything going right. That's probably what you want to do as a builder or a home or an owner builder, is try to get as many things right as possible.
Can you share with listeners what some of the benefits of hand-built homes are for the builder and homeowner, and also for the environment?
Cost is really a huge factor there. I mean, that's a category all of its own. But if you build it yourself, you're going to save 50% because labor and materials are about 50-50. Then if you don't get a bank loan, you're going to save a huge amount of money because you're not going to be paying interest on a 30-year bank loan. But if you do it yourself, you get to pick the materials. You use materials that you want to live with, and you're intimately involved with the design. I designed my own houses. Maybe some people might want to get. No, actually, the first place I built was designed by an architect. It was very, very difficult. It was quite beautiful, but it wasn't anything I would design. So, and then there's definitely a satisfaction in building. Like, I always love the moment when I step up on the floor. The flooring is nailed down. It's just this, oh, wow, look at this. So there's that part of it, and I don't know, just some people are sort of motivated to build. I mean, building a house from scratch is sort of like having a baby. It takes about a year. If you're going to do it solo, it's about a year, and it's really difficult. There's a lot of it that's really hard because you have to, you can't be a flaked out hippie. You've got to pay attention if you're doing wiring and plumbing, things that they have to work. It's not like a house isn't like a painting that you can toss if you don't like it. It's going to be there like forever. So there's that part of it, but I loved it. I would, when I was working in the insurance business, I'd come home at night, like in the kind of warm summer nights, and my friend Bob would come over, and we'd work building on this remodeling thing. I remember we were playing the Beatles songs while working. Again, I love the process. I love the process of building a book as well as building a house.
And as far as environmental, are there benefits of building your own home? Well, I guess it depends on what you use for materials.
Yeah, I mean, because you can choose what, like people, a big thing now are people are insulating with sheep's wool. There have been a lot of things that have happened since I was building, like the tools. There's a complete revolution in tools. What I did in building was I used wood. I thought it had more character, and I was saving resources. I wasn't cutting down trees. So everything I did practically was with used. Like the house I live in now is built out of wood from Navy barracks on Treasure Island. So I was doing that. I mean, back in the 60s, it was just natural. We didn't call it green, or we didn't think of saving resources. We were saving resources, but we weren't self-conscious about it. It just seemed like the thing to do.
So basically, a lot of the wood is reclaimed material that might have otherwise gone to the landfill.
Yeah, some people do it that way. It all depends if you've got enough time to deal with it, as opposed to buying something new. But that you asked about the benefits, and that that is one of the benefits, is that you're able to pick the materials, and a lot of people, a lot of builders really do study things to do. Like son Ray Kelly built a wood stove that heats the floor of the house with hot water. It provides hot water for the kitchen and the bathroom. You can cook in the stove. You can make a pizza in it, and it's a space heater. So, he's not. I don't think he thinks of doing that because it's green. He's just doing it because it's a right thing to do.
And it works.
Yeah, it really works. And so I hear from people all the time that are doing these really kind of ingenious things. I have a solar water heater here that I've had for maybe 15 years. It's a box with a black tank in it, double-walled polycarbonate material on the face of it, and it runs an outdoor shower. And every time I take a shower out there, I have a different feeling, because this water was heated by the sun. There was no energy at all used. I mean, it cost some money to build the collector, but once that's done, it's all free. We were doing these things in the 60s, like the high school where I was, where we built all these geodesic domes. One guy was building a wind turbine to try to generate electricity. And so we were all trying to do all of those things. It's kind of interesting because nobody talked about being green then. You were just talking about, hey, if we can use the sun to heat water, it's just seems like the thing to do.
Common sense.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do that. There was a lot of hope and probably naivete back in the 60s about these things. I really thought that it was a new world, that politics was going to change, that we were going to start conserving resources, that we were going to make some real improvements over the way things were going, and it didn't quite happen that way. But also, maybe it doesn't happen maybe there isn't a great big second act. A lot of those things, like organic food production, have filtered through to the general consciousness. And solar everything, solar electricity, solar hot water, wind generating, all of that stuff was really, I think that a lot of the things in the 60s, it wasn't like they were new, but it was the new group of the new population group, the baby boom, this big, large number of people who had enough time. Things were easy enough then to get into these things. So they discovered Rodale, the organic gardening guru, and they discovered Ken Kern, who wrote the Owner Builder Home. They discovered these things like solar heating. They weren't brand new, but it was a huge group of people that jumped onto those things and gave them a lot of publicity through the newly formed media, like the Homeowner catalog.
For those who are listening and don't know about that catalog, can you just tell us a bit about that, and why was it so important?
What the Homeowner catalog was, so the things that I was mentioning, like organic gardening and home building and consciousness of dolphins and looking at the earth as a whole, a lot of things in different categories. Stuart Brand put them all together in this 64-page catalog that was the size of a tabloid newspaper, because it was printed on a newspaper press, and it cost like $3 or $4. And it was a series of reviews of all different things, books, L.L. Bean catalog, places I guess Stuart called them tools that you would be interested in. And everybody was interested in all these things, and everybody that I knew. So it was kind of an explosion of information and activity, really. In those days, everybody was really excited by all this stuff. And the Homeowner catalog was sort of like the touchstone. So the second Homeowner catalog, so when Stuart did that, I said, well, I got a lot of stuff for you. So then he started doing these supplements. They were called the difficult but possible supplements to the Homeowner catalog. And they were quarterly, and they were on real cheap newsprint.
So they didn't actually sell things. It was more a conglomeration of all of these amazing tools and ideas.
Yeah, it sold millions of copies. It actually changed. It opened up the way to West Coast publishing. that had never happened before, where you could do a book in California and get it distributed by the big boys in New York.
And do you think that the Whole Earth catalog influenced your books?
Well, the first two books I did were, we borrowed the production facilities of the Whole Earth catalog. So we were using their, it was called a composer, the IBM composer. It was actually one of those, those typewriters that have balls, fonts. You change the ball, and so that was kind of the transition in between hot lead, linotype, and the computer. So anyway, it was like an $8,000 typewriter. So we borrowed theirs in their production facilities and did the book. So yeah, I mean, it was all part of the same spirit, really.
So you were really involved with the hub of the whole self-sufficient, what we would call alternative now, but really in the 60s, that was the prevailing spirit, at least for that part of the country.
I was the journalist, I guess, in the whole thing.
Well, and you also do your blog, which is lloydkahn.com, Kahn. And so tell us a bit about your blog and what people can find there.
Just my take on things. It's stuff I run across, and it's all over the place, really. I mean, I'm just about to I put up music, a lot of building stuff, a lot of tiny homes, vehicles, camping, surfing, skateboarding, videos of, dancing, and various things. So it's kind of like my journal, and I do it daily. And but we're changing. We're going to do it. We're just about to start something called the Shelter Blog, and it's going to be limited to building and gardening and farming and mobile homes and barns and food preparation and hunting and fishing and those sort of things. So it'll all be on the Shelter Blog, and then my blog will kind of just get to be more like, here's something I ran across today.
You've really spent most of your life communicating with people about ideas that you find valuable.
Yeah, I'm amazed that I've been able to make a living doing it, which is just kind of comes natural. I'm just kind of a blabbermouth.
I come from a newspaper background family. My mom started a newspaper and ran it for years. So
Really?
Yeah, I really appreciate newspapers, and it was it was a weekly paper.
I love everything about it. I love the printing plants. I like the smell of ink. I like the pressmen. I mean, I just admire those guys so much. They're so skillful in what they do. And I go to the printing. I mean, that's all part of it too. I go to the printing of each color book.
And yeah, the books are so gorgeous. So Shelter Publications, you just came out with, I think it's Tiny Homes on the Move. Is that the title?
Yeah.
So that's about mobile homes, but they're very unusual homes. Some are sailboats. There's teeny tiny homes that people live in. Can you tell us a bit about that book and where people can find it?
Well, it's Tiny Homes, and on the Tiny Homes on the Move, and the subtitle is Wheels and Water. And the wheels part are like vans, pickup trucks with camper shells, house trucks, house buses, and trailers. Very large section on trailers. And then the water part of it are sailboats, houseboats, and tugboats that people live on. So everything has to be mobile in this book. That's the kind of the structure of it.
Where can people find your book?
Well, they can get it Amazon, of course, and from our website, which is shelterpub.com. Actually, we're selling the book for $20, which is cheaper than Amazon. Shameless commerce blurb here. And so anyway, it's shelterpub.com. And if you go in there for the next maybe 3 weeks, you can get the book for $19.95. The book is $28.95.
It's so great. The vans and the buses, I fell in love with some of those homes. They're just beautiful.
I'm surprised by the book. I didn't really, just putting it together a few pages at a time, I didn't really know what it was going to be like, and I don't know, people just absolutely are nuts about it. A lot of people come up and say, I can't put it down. And then young guy was chastising me for taking up all his time.
I know, it's true. Well, my partner, Kevin, I was reading it and he took it and I said, where is that book? And he said, I'm hiding it because I want to finish it.
Yeah. Well, I thought that all along, I thought that this book, we all thought that this was going to be a kind of, not really have the impact of the book Tiny Homes, which was quite a great success. But I think now, this maybe is relevant to more people because, even if you're not going to live in a house bus, you might want to think about, putting a shell on the back of your camper and fixing it up this way, or, fixing up a van, or, here's a guy who lives on his sailboat in Seattle, instead of paying high rent. And you get ideas here. So I think it's going to be a really popular book. It's only been out for about 2 weeks.
Oh, really? Oh, that's fantastic. Do you think that tiny homes, do you think more and more people are going to be downsizing in the future?
I don't know. I think that probably the economy and the bust that happened sort of jolted everybody. All the houses that were being built, at least in the Bay Area, or Marin County, they were just too big. They were big and stupid, and not well designed, and they use a lot of resources, to heat a big house and cool it. So I think that maybe there are signs that, at least in some places or with some builders, they're getting smaller. I think that the tiny homes, there's really quite a movement. It appeals to people because it's the opposite of the gross, the McMansions, and the timing is good. I think it's symbolic, and I think that a tiny home like the ones in our tiny homes book, it's not for a whole lot of people, really. I mean, if you're gonna have a couple living in 120 square feet, they're gonna have to be pretty
Skinny.
pretty copacetic with each other to get along. But the thing that I think the idea is, like I say to people, I'm not the tiny homes guy. I'm the build it yourself guy. And what's really more realistic than these tiny homes in our book are going to be is small homes, which are, say, the tiny homes is under 500 square feet. And I think we're going to do a book probably in a few years called Small Homes, which will be 400 to 1,200 square feet. And that's more realistic. But I mean, the tiny homes thing, it's just a delight to see people doing these things, and to see some people who, really are doing it well. A lot of them are single. But you're looking at San Francisco at $3,000 a month for a studio apartment.
In some of your books, people also build maybe an office as a tiny home in the backyard, or have smaller little units almost on their property.
Yeah, well, Portland and Santa Cruz, California, Portland, Oregon, they have ordinances that allow people that relax the building codes for people building a little, like a granny flat in the backyard. It's really good to do that. They're encouraging, I don't know if you call it low-cost housing, but they're encouraging sensible costs in creating shelter. Like your mom is, say somebody's mom starts, getting ill or gets dementia. Well, it's going to cost $35,000 a year to put her in a rest home. You don't have that kind of money, so you build a little place in the backyard. Or your son comes home from college at age 26, or he gets out of college, doesn't have a job, and oh joy, he gets to live with us. So, stick him out in the backyard.
And there was a quote in your book that said something like, instead of thinking about what I wanted, I thought about what I didn't need, I think was what the quote was.
Which
is so inspiring, because these homes are so, I don't know about living in it full time. Like you're saying, it might not be practical for some people, but they're just the detail and the craftsmanship is just gorgeous.
Well, if I were, say, 25 years old and had some kind of a job somewhere and wasn't married or didn't have a steady girlfriend, I mean, that would make a lot of sense. Say I have to work. I work in San Francisco. So I'm going to have this little place, or I'm going to get a houseboat, or I'm going to get a houseboat and anchor it out in the bay here and live there and row in each day and catch the bus into San Francisco, or to do it for such a small amount of money that it's a joke. Put 2/3 of your or half of your salary into rent. Sometimes I think of that. You ever see that movie Fahrenheit 451?
Mm-hmm.
But the theme there. It was about a time in the future where they burned books, and the police went around in these little kind of helicopters, and so there was a group of people who were dedicated to books, and each one of these people took it upon themselves to memorize one book. So they would be out on the outskirts of the town walking around in the snow, this guy's memorizing Moby Dick, and then here's a woman, she's memorizing something by Virginia Woolf. And so this group of people, they're sort of like, on the fringes. And sometimes I think that people like us who want to have a house that's rich and warm, and the textures are good, and the feng shui is as good as it can be, and it feels good, and it's a place where you can cook and heal if you're sick, and get a sleep at night, and that there's a group of us who like those kind of things, but I don't know how big a group it is. I don't know what percentage of the population. I mean, there certainly are people who are not of that ilk and do not have that sort of approach. Dwell Magazine, that's a whole different group. So I've been thinking, well, okay, it's like we don't have to be the way that everybody has to be. There's just a bunch of us. We're like a family. We like things like this, and if somebody comes into our house and they're going to feel good right away from all the stuff that's there and what's happening there. And I think shelter is such an important thing to people. I mean, it's kind of like it's where you get ready to create your life or to go out and deal with the world. Is where your shelter is just a hugely important thing. So I like in a sense I like to be working on that, and I like to be trying to help people help themselves to getting a roof over their head that does a lot of right things.
That's rejuvenating for them. That is a home.
Yeah, right.
In many of your books, you have a quote that says, "Shelter is more than a roof overhead."
Yeah.
Can you? I mean, I think you've talked about that. Yeah, tell us what that means to you. And I think you just described it in a way.
Yeah, I sometimes I'm not even sure what that means. But I think it means what we meant back then was that it's not just a roof. I mean, because you could have a tin roof not work at all. So it's like that. Yeah, it is what I just described. It's that it's more than the physical part of it. It's the way it's put together, and a roof just means any roof. That seemed like a good opening to the book Shelter. Look at all these aspects of shelter, of building that don't have to do with just getting in out of the rain.
If you were going to build a house today, and you might already be building one, is knowing the way that it sounds like you built so many. Do you have any advice for people? Any type of building or materials that you would recommend?
Well, it all depends on where you are. If you're living up in British Columbia, where the trees grow really fast and it rains a lot, it makes sense to use wood. And if you're living in the desert where there's no trees, it makes sense to use adobe. Each place has sort of got its materials. I like to look at the old buildings and see what they did. I like to look at farm buildings because they often are. You can learn a lot from them. You can learn local methods of construction that are going to be practical because farmers are not architects. And you're going to learn about, say, the wind and the sun. How are these buildings facing, and what you're going to build. I mean, there's just all kinds of alternatives. You're going to design it yourself, or you're going to get an architect if you can find an architect that will help you get what you want. And I like the idea of, if you have a piece of land or you're out in the woods, I kind of like the idea of building something small, a shed or something that you could. Ideally, you'd be able to take a few years. So you'd build a shed on this land and you'd sleep there. You'd have a little wood stove in there, and you'd spend time on the land for a year and watch which way the wind blows and where the rain comes from, and learn, and then build your house. But I would love to build one more place. I would do it with wood because you hear about straw bale houses and cob and all these different building materials, but pretty much all houses, the roof is wood. So you've got carpentry going on. The best thing to do really is to look through these books and see what people do in different places, and maybe something will resonate. If I were a builder, I would do that.
Yeah, I loved so many of those houses there in your books.
What I learned in building domes is it's not a good idea to build from an abstract concept. In other words, here we've got an icosahedron, triangulated, and we're going to make buildings out of that. Well, that or you're going to build a seven-sided tower. Well, if you can do stuff like that, but it's going to take you 3 times as long and cost you 3 times as much money if you deviate from time-tested building techniques. That's why it's good for anybody who's thinking about designing something to get some building experience and to not. A lot of the abstract ideas, they look good on paper, but you go talk to a carpenter about building this thing, and he'll go, "You're nuts. You're nuts. You're going to have to do that." That's what Sunray used to draw these fanciful plans for houses, and the builder said, "Look, you're not going to find anybody to do. If you're going to have to do that yourself, you're going to have to build it yourself." And that's what he did.
So it's like the practical part of it.
Yeah, I kind of also believe in the practical because I don't want my house to be my whole life. I'm going to spend my whole, or 3 times as long, 2 times as long building this shelter as I need to. I want to build it and have it function and get on with my life.
What would be your hope for the future of shelter and building?
My hope, our books are my hope, really, and I think that young people are discovering these things which are good things to know about and to good skills to have in your life, and that'll go on. It's going to happen, and so we're really kind of a part of it. So the 60s happened in the 70s, and it's really true in a lot of ways, because a lot of the things that just got started in the 60s really got rolling in the 70s. And then maybe the 80s is at the time of greed. Jerry Rubin went to work as a stockbroker from being a bushy-bearded political protester. And then 80s, 90s, and it seems like it's been 30 years maybe, 30 years since the 70s. And I think that this is a new generation, and I don't know if it has to do with them growing up in a digital world, or it has to do with there not being that many jobs or whatever it is, but there's all these young people that are contacting us, and so I would hope that would continue. I mean, it's going to continue. There are some good things that are going on, and I think that the 20-year-olds there's a whole lot of them that are really on the ball and create some really good lives.
Exactly. And I feel like they're already advanced for their age.
Yeah.
One last question, and then we'll close soon, is your work just seems so fun to me. Like you're traveling around, documenting these people that are building these amazing places and documenting old buildings and interviewing people. What's one of the favorite parts of your career, your job?
Oh, I mean, one of my favorite things to do is to go hunting and with my camera, whether it's in a city or in the countryside. I really love doing that. I love putting the books together. I don't like the business part. I like paddling, a paddleboard, and hiking, and a lot of stuff. I think you have to have some kind of fun each day. That's a good thing to do. But I sort of like a whole lot of things that I'm doing, and I wish I had a clone or two. Because one clone could go surfing in Costa Rica, and the other guy would tend to business. That's the part that I don't love, is the business part of it, and even the marketing part of it. This author, a friend of mine, said once, "Don't you just wish you could just create a book and it would just fly out there and sell like mad, and you didn't have to do anything about it?"
Yes.
It doesn't work that way. So, but anyway, my life is so full that I kind of just sometimes bounce around from one thing to the other.
That's so great. It's just, and your books definitely are infused with that sense of curiosity, which I love in adults. I love it. My favorite people still have that sense of curiosity about the world.
Well, and also I've got the compulsion to communicate. So that's the combination. I love, like if I go out, I'm sort of like I'm taking you along with me riding shotgun. That's my idea. That's so I'm going to write about it, and I'm going to try to make it seem as if you're there, the reader. You're there with me. You're in my truck, and here's what we see, or we're talking to this person, and here's what they say. Here's what this looks like. So communicating it kind of doubles the intensity of the experience, because I'm not only seeing it, but I'm thinking, okay, I can tell people about this because this is far out, and I want to tell people about it.
Well, the books are fabulous. And again, if people want to reach you, how can they find you online?
Well, in say June 1st, I don't know when this might air, but there's going to be the Shelter blog, all one word. I think it's going to do now what the book Shelter did in the 70s was just kind of tie a whole lot of things together, so that people that are interested, like the people we talked about, that are interested in these sort of things, are going to see it, daily on this blog.
It's been such a pleasure to speak with you, and I hope that you write a new book soon.
It'll be a few years. The next book we do is going to be a pocket book of our book Stretching, which is a hugely popular book. So we're going to do a pocket book of that. That's nothing to do with what we've been talking about here. For 20 years I did fitness books. So then I think the next building book will be small homes, and it'll be a few years to gather enough stuff for it. But the thing is, on our blog, we'll be able to communicate daily with people. So, like information comes in, and it's really good information, but I've got to put it away for years until it's ever going to appear in a book. But if stuff comes in now, within, a day, we're going to put it up and get it out, so it's going to be kind of like a running book.
Oh, that's great.
The Shelter blog. Yeah, I'm really excited about it, yeah.
And it will be the Shelter blog?
The Shelter blog, yeah.
Okay, .com.
Yeah.
So Lloyd, I know that we're running out of time, but I just wanted to point out that one of my favorite parts about the books that I get from you are the little miniature books that come along with the order. Can you tell people about that?
Well, they're about 2 by 2 inches. We can't mail them out to people if they write us. It's just too much postage and time, but we give them out at fairs, and we do include them if they buy tiny homes or tiny homes on the move. They're a total hit. We printed 30,000 of those things. And now we just gave away 3,500 of them at the Maker Faire.
They're just so
little,
cute.
They're really cute little books, and they're well put together too.
They're adorable. It's like a little tiny home book that's a really tiny little book.
64 pages out of the book.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful to talk with you. And and you didn't think you could talk for 40 minutes, and we've gone for an hour and 8 minutes.
I could. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, Jill.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening. Our first documentary, The Soil Solution, is now available at sustainableworldmedia.com. The Soil Solution is a 28-minute documentary film that explores the potential that healthy soil may hold in reversing climate change.